All right, my name is Aaron Kennedy. I'm with Cognition360. I'm here with James Davis of C Level. How's it going, James?
Good, thanks, Aaron. How about yourself?
Good to see you. Good to see you. So, James, this is our second kind of fireside chat without a fire, where we're just talking, service metrics and how they things that service managers should be working on, and not just service managers, I guess, but anybody in the MSP from a service kind of lens. At Cognition 360, obviously, we're real big on metrics and analytics and making sure that stuff happens. And I hear so often that what we do is we divide our product up into different areas of the business so that people can focus on those certain areas. And if I'm ever talking to a service manager, I can always tell whenever I'm going over something with finance, they glaze over, or they might even just stop me and just I'm just not interested in that. Let's just jump into the tickets, or I want to talk more about my team utilization or something like that, which is obviously important. But I know they're just always a little bit just shy or just not interested in the financial aspect of it.
I I've found the same thing too from experience, like being in the service exec peer groups and Evolve, talking to other service managers, coaching service managers.
Mm-hmm.
They always avoid the financial aspects. And a lot of the time, I think it's a couple of things. It's uncomfortable with money and don't really understand it,
Mm-hmm.
which that's easy to get over. It's very easy to talk through service gross margin, which yeah, we'll talk about that shortly. But I think a lot of the time too, it's because owners actually shut that off as a thing of curiosity. It's
Yeah.
they don't. A lot of owners are reluctant to share financial details at all with their employees. There's a lot of a control thing. There's a lot of fear around misunderstanding. A lot of owners don't understand the business financials well enough themselves to explain and develop a.
That's true.
I know I was in that point at
Mm-hmm.
that point at one time. Like we've all been there. Um, and I think even if a service manager is curious about it and wants to drive by the financials, a lot of the owners shut that down. Like I've
Right.
coached people where I'm like, you need to know this stuff. Go to the owner, and they're like, no, no financials for you.
Yeah.
And that just shuts down all the curiosity. So I see a big danger in this because we end up running service departments a certain way without the financial context. We just
Right.
default to, like what you said, the ticket counts and stuff. And we're always aiming to get as low as possible. If you don't have that financial context, you could be doing really well on some of those metrics, but be super unprofitable. So like, as a business owner, what's more important? Have good
Right.
ticket numbers or be profitable? Ideally, you'd have both, but you often can't achieve both without having visibility to both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the problems that people come to us with that they're trying to solve is from a service perspective is they're often looking for team utilization, and we provide that kind of right away, so it's an instant draw for people where they can come in and see how much are people utilized, billable, realized, whatever the metric they're looking for, but essentially, are they putting time in, how much are they used? And so when you really dig into why the service manager is looking for that metric, it's because the very common, oh, we don't have enough technicians. So I need to dig in and find out, is everybody pulling their weight? And if not, then I can make a justification to ownership that now we need to hire, which I always feel like is the total backwards way to do it. It's hey, we need to look at things from a finance perspective. What are things costing us still on the service desk? I'm not proposing if you get into the margin discussions with your disty or anything like that, but looking at things like from a customer profitability level, what are these, or agreement, any certain level of um, minimum margin that you're looking for, and whether that's service gross margin. I see some people, they don't look at margins as much, they're looking for effective rate, which is just another way to do the same thing. But the point is they're coming at it from a financial aspect first, because I can tell you, if that is in play and your service and everything's working well from a financial perspective, and then the service manager says, hey, we need more people to maintain this level of margin. I mean, why would you not give that person the approval to go hire somebody else? Because I feel like owners are just constantly being tugged by service managers of, I need more people, I need more people. And the response is, well, you need to make the people work harder. And this is back and forth tension that's always going on, and everybody's always upset.
It's a really good point, and I think it too, like you said, that owners are driving. Oh, you need to look at utilization rates because they're not looking at service gross margin either to
Mhm.
manage the service desk. So if we're all fully utilized and we've still got more work to do, yeah, that makes sense for a hiring decision. But if you haven't looked at what our profitability is, um, we've just pulled this lever that's going to drag another lever down quite significantly because we don't have all that context. And from my experience, like we talk about the levers of service gross margin, one of the key components in that is pricing
Mhm.
of our hourly rates, our fixed price to deliver professional services, and like our managed services rates. Often the service managers have no control over that whatsoever. But and neither should they. Like we shouldn't have service managers dictating really how much we're charging for sales and what we're selling. They should be involved in influencing that and understanding it. But it never comes into the conversation when I'm talking to people about their inefficiencies in the service department. It's never, it's always focused on how, starting with like to get our utilization rates in the first place, we've got to have our time entered.
Mhm.
If we're not entering time, that's our first problem. So we
Yeah.
don't actually know where it's all going. So once we've got that, then we know how productive we are, and then we can look at the efficiencies of our processes to deliver, the way we're managing it, um, the amount of endpoints we're managing, and all that kind of stuff. But it never takes into account, well, how much are we charging?
Mhm.
Because if we're
Right.
not charging enough in the first place, you're never going to achieve a good service gross margin. Like
Yeah.
you're
And
off the
certainly a
back.
lot of the older MSPs tend to kind of fall in that. They were hey, we're charging 85 a seat or whatever it was. I mean, at my MSP, I think we charged 55 a seat when we started. And, just getting around the mindset of, hey, we got to keep moving that up, to match market and other things, and then we're laying services on top of that, is hard for, I think, some owners to kind of wrap their head around. Like, I can't sell that, so I have to get it at, if you were trying to sell it at 55 a user now, I mean, you'd be out of business. So it's one of those, like, the cart leading the horse kind of thing, where it's not going to work if you're not looking at, the front end, which is the pricing, and then, the back end is the billing, of course.
And I think it, the lack of insight into that and being able to, for a lot of people, they struggle to be able to truly view agreement profitability
Hmm.
because they don't have the data set up correctly. Like their agreement and contracts in the PSAs often aren't set up very well to be able to report on that granularity. And people forget that there's different levels of data that we're looking at. And people think that most of our financial data is really driven by the P&L, which obviously that's our business performance.
Yep.
But for us to get any level of real granularity of like client performance, it's out of the PSA.
Hmm.
Um, and what I tend to find the majority of the industry is doing is in the PSAs with setting up their agreements and contracts, they're just putting like one-liners in, and they're not really understanding how the price and the costing um, settings in attributes inside the PSAs flow through to the client reporting. We're often, what I'm seeing as well is people have bundled in products like 365 and other things into the one liner,
Yep.
so we can't split out what our product costs are and what our labor costs are. And a lot of people don't input like the member costs inside the PSA either. So there's nothing actually driving in the system for data to show us the financial realities. Because when you start getting that and you put a client in front of them that done this several times where it's like, oh, we've got this big client, they're generating all this money. We go and help them fix their data up, and then generate a report out of the PSA and go, well, yeah, they might be a 20 grand a month client, but you're only generating a grand's worth of gross margin each month. So are they really that good of a client?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we see that
Um,
a lot. A lot.
and that's to me always the key driver of all the rest of the metrics is the service gross margin. So what a lot of people also don't think about, which comes into the levers, like we've spoken about the pricing. There's the costs for our hard costs, like we've mentioned like the last session that we did. The hard costs for the tools that we're using. You probably see this a lot too. The amount of MSPs that rush off and get all the latest and shiny tools that come out on the market,
Right.
And don't ever think about it. They just keep adding and adding and adding, and don't look at the costs and the efficiencies of using them.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, most people that I coach around like the $1 to $2 million, when I have a look at their finances and I get them to look at the potential things they can cost, on average, I can probably save them 2 grand a month of systems they're not using, or they've got the highest tier license and they're not using the features for it.
Yeah.
But no one's ever stopped to look at it. Because
one thing that we do that we recently started is doing it's kind of a vendor justification webinar series where we go in and we talk with different vendors about, what is it your value proposition is to the customer. And so, if the vendor says, oh, we make technicians more efficient. Well, how much more efficient? 25% more efficient. Well, really? So I can go in and see that from the data, because we can compare, hey, in June 22nd, they implemented this tool, and over the past 18 months, here's what their technicians have done from an efficiency standpoint. So we've been kind of going through that exercise. And so in talking with MSPs, we're talking about that. Well, when did you implement this? Well, your data looks the exact same. I don't think that vendor's doing what you thought it was doing. And I would tell you, like, at least 1 out of 3 times, it's, well, you know what? We actually haven't turned that on. We've just been paying for it for 18 months.
I would back that up completely. It's the owner goes to Evolve or a Datto Roadshow or something and see something and like buys it on the spot, and then no one's actually followed through and implemented it properly,
right?
Or if at all. Like and without visibility, like, because a lot of owners don't really dive deep into the finances. They just look at the P&L. They'll look at the top level numbers, and if they look at them at all, the amount of owners that just rely on the accountant to say, "Great, you're doing good."
We
I don't
payroll.
know many. Exactly, we made payroll. We've got some cash in the bank. You're doing good.
Yep.
But even the owners that do go through the finances on a regular basis, it's always just the P&L surface level. They never dive into the deeper detail to go, what's actually driving this?
Yep.
And that's where the advantage of pushing some of this down on your leaders is important. So if you've got service gross margin expectations on the service manager, and you help support them to understand the levers that come to it, and you set a target of where they need to meet, who do you reckon is going to drive this tool implementations and cut costs?
Right.
Because you've got someone bought in. But it's very few MSPs get to that point of doing that, but it's so powerful.
Yeah. I do think you touched on this at the beginning. I do think it's a lot of the trust of financial data. And then I think it's a combination of trust. And I know that I don't want to burden them with this finances. I just want to take the finances on me, and I don't want to have to talk with them about it. It's kind of like your kids. Like, I don't want to tell them about the bills coming up. I just want them to be happy and enjoy life, because I remember what that was like. But that doesn't work in the business world, where it's just like you've got somebody that's over an entire department and he has no idea if his department is profitable or not. He just knows, like, hey, our kill rate is whatever. And so he focuses on those. which is not a bad thing, but I always think that's kind of a second level metric of, if you're not profitable or your service gross margin is not good in a certain area, then you jump into well, what is the kill rate for this customer? Is it bad? Or whatever the metric may be. But I always think that people start with those kind of second or third level metrics and just hyper focus on them, when really, I mean, we're talking about business here, so it's all about profitability, and it doesn't matter if you're in the help desk or if you're crunching the numbers. That's what is going to drive everything else.
And it shows time and time again, like service leadership, anecdotal experience, you would have been through it there as well. The service departments that run profitably are always the most efficient and give the most client experience, because we've got money to invest in it. We're well run and a well-oiled machine.
Right.
The ones that are always the least profitable are always the biggest basket cases and aren't efficient. All the things that we think we're solving by having a lot more people there actually cause even more issues for the clients. And it's counterintuitive to us that have grown like organically and not really been in touch with the finances. It sounds weird to that paradigm shift of, well, if I actually make more money, we'll service the clients better.
Right.
But the data backs it up time and time again. And that's the next lever of the service gross margin is your people costs. It's your biggest cost in this in delivering a service. Yeah, you've got the tool costs, but especially at the moment with salaries going up and up and up, if we're not managing that and we're not tying that into how much we're pricing our services,
right? Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
It's just shrinking at the
Yeah.
moment. Like what I'm just seeing across the board, people not managing this very well. Our margins are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's going to be harder and harder to pick it back up and reframe it, going back to the pricing conversation. And when we're stuck on that whole utilization component, they could all be super busy, 100%.
Right.
But what are they actually doing, and what are they actually contributing to the bottom line? This is where that service labor cost to revenue ratio is such a useful number to tie in the financials to see are we on the right track.
Yeah.
And for people that aren't aware of that, that's the cost times the ratio to what revenue they should be generating. So typically for an average MSP, we should be seeing that 2.5 to 3 times as a good rate. So if they're earning 100,000, they should be generating 250 to 300,000 as a sort of a minimum. Ideally, you want the number to be as big as possible, but there's a certain component of when you're just doing labor for you doing a price per hour. There's only so much you can squeeze out of someone. So if you're a typical MSP, going above 3 is when you're usually burning people out.
Yeah. Yep. So that's a good question that I've got for you. So obviously it's pretty straightforward. If I'm paying someone 100,000, how to calculate that? Just look at the payroll. But how do you calculate how much they're contributing in terms of bringing in $250,000 worth of value?
So in simplicity for this, usually you'd start when you're getting into this, you'd start as getting your total services revenue. So that should only be for the labor components. That should be the time and materials that we're billing out per hour, the professional services labor that we're doing as a fixed price, or the managed services revenue of what we're providing for support and management. So this is where getting the data right in the first place really makes a difference, because if you start putting product revenue in it,
right, that's
really going to skew the numbers. So you add all that services revenue up, you've got the payroll cost, divide the revenue by the payroll cost, there's your ratio. Starts to get a bit trickier as you're trying to get to individual contributions. But that's when we can do journaling and allocations. But honestly, a lot of the time, I never really bother going to the individuals unless they're billing by the hour and they're in charge of their destiny.
Right.
It's
Right.
more, it's more of a team indicator a lot of the time from my perspective.
Hmm.
So if you're quickly adding up the numbers in your head of what you think it is, if you're not in that 2.5, 3 range, um, typically there's only two drivers from this. You've either got way too many people or you're not billing enough. And that's where you start to get into are we pricing enough? Are we not scoping our projects well enough? Are we giving a lot of credits back to our time and materials clients?
Yeah. And when
And
you're
it's
counting people, are you counting non-engineers in that, like admin staff and everything? Are you counting all headcount?
initially I would just count only the technical billable people. As you
Hmm.
start scaling up, you'd want to include your dispatchers and team leaders, the people that are delivering the services. Um, the reason why I don't include them in the first place, when you're a lot when you're a lot more immature, um, they're often people that are doing dispatch and stuff aren't just typically doing dispatch. They're usually in
Everything.
sales, they're
Answering
everything.
the
So
door.
yeah, yep. Taking out the rubbish, stacking the dishwasher. Um, and to me, it skews the numbers for those immature companies because they can't split it up well enough to show the allocations of where those people are. But as you
Right.
get more mature, as you get larger, that becomes a lot easier, and it's a lot easier then to really show what the service department billable ratios are.
Yeah.
Some of the levers when you start getting more mature and looking at this to drive that number to go higher than 3 is good high margin um, managed services contract. So if you're billing the $55 an hour, $55 a seat managed services, your
Hmm.
ratio is going to be tiny compared to maybe if you're doing it at $200
Right.
a seat. Um, Doing fixed price projects and then leveraging automation and stuff to do it for you, all of a sudden there's less labor that's going against it. You're generating more service revenue. And same with the managed services. The more automation you've got in place, less people that you need to deliver the revenue. And I've seen really, really good MSPs that can run in the 4 or 5 times ratio because
Mm.
they're invested in that automation to to drive the efficiencies. Also worth mentioning in all this service gross margin and this ratio stuff, the thing that often goes unseen that really contributes to these good margins and good ratios is actually good IT environments. If you've got a good sales regime that's replacing hardware and systems
Oh, right.
consistently in the lifespans, there's a lot less issues that need to be maintained.
Hmm.
So not only will you get professional services revenue out if you're doing fixed price desktops and you're automating it and there's a lot less labor to deal with it, you're also reducing the amount of tickets that come in, which reduces the amount of admin, like triage people and the
Right.
dispatching that needs to happen, and the less technical stuff the guys need to do. So you don't need as many people to service your clients as
That's
you
right.
would if they were bad environments.
And when you bring on somebody new, you don't have to train them on 16 different routers to support. You just this one router. This is all we use. And so obviously a lot more quicker ramp up time, which means less troubleshooting, less escalating to your senior, expensive resources, things like that. Um,
Which, yeah, like you just said, is like if there's less seniors that you need, even if you need the same bodies, it means that you can have less seniors at the top and have a lot more juniors at the bottom, which
yeah,
are much cheaper resources.
yeah,
So it all interconnects. So if you don't have financial context, you can see how quickly this falls apart when you're just doing the looking at ticket numbers.
yeah. One of the MSPs I've worked with, and this isn't super uncommon, but has taken a top five, bottom five approach to kind of looking at these from a profit metric. So, in other words, the top five most profitable clients we've got. So you're under servicing those potentially, and bottom five, obviously, you're losing money. And they they assign that the service manager has what they call a technical alignment engineer, where their only job is to look at that client and say, well, what does their technical stack look like? And what's it going to take to get them to our technical stack in terms of cost? And does it make sense for us to maybe even subsidize some of that because of how much we're losing on this? So if we propose a project to them, hey, I'll knock $2,000 off this project because I want you to move over, or maybe we need to increase the rate or whatever, but they're viewing this from a financial aspect, but using a technical, almost like sales engineer to kind of move them over. I always thought that was neat. It's something I would have wanted to do.
It's quite cool once you start looking at it. Like that's a really great example of reframing the financial aspect and doing something different. I've got clients that have hired technology trainers, software trainers to go in and train the end users so they reduce the amount of issues that are coming in. Got people that hire DevOps to go and automate stuff and remove the labor. So reallocating the costs to reduce the burden is a very mature way of doing it. But you're never going to get there if you don't have the financial aspects.
Right.
And it just opens up the door for a lot of different discussions and a lot of different ways of doing it, which the normal metrics that you walk into an MSP and see on their big TV screen, very rarely do they have any financial context or driving any type of real business performance.
Does that still happen anymore? People have metrics on TV screens anymore?
They still do.
I hear people talking about, yeah, I've just got TVs in there that they're turned off. Because they only have 20% in the office or something like that at one time anyway. And nobody was ever looking up there to start with. Just the clients. They walk in, ooh, looks like you're doing something.
Yeah, it looks pretty.
Yeah, it looks pretty. Looks pretty. Okay, so what do you think from a once you've kind of gotten past the hey, this is a unprofitable customer, what are the next metrics that you should look at from a service standpoint? So I've said, okay, James and Aaron, I'm gonna look at this from a financial lens. I've said, hey, this isn't where we want it to be, and now I'm gonna step into this. Is that team utilization? Is that kind of where we start, or is that like a ticket kill rate ratio or a technician to node ratio? I mean, there's all these kind of ratios you can look at. What's one of the one where you push them towards?
First thing I'd start with is how's it priced?
Yeah.
Straight up, because we ignore that straight. Like all MSPs ignore that.
Yep.
It's often the too hard basket. But like, if straight up they're being charged 55 a seat, we don't even need to dig any further.
Yeah.
Like, let's just cut to the chase and go, well, we need to be charging them 100, 150. Whatever else we do past there is it's not going to solve anything. We're just going to spend more time on it and make it less profitable than what it is.
So good question. So you start there, and let's just say, okay, we're clearly charging not enough, and now we need to charge X. How do you go through that exercise?
So I've had to go through this awkwardness in the past. We've all been there. A lot of the time, I see the best results is to just go to the client and say directly, like, you're below market rates. We're doing all this work, and you can present that however you like. Like this comes down to style. I've had this conversation without presenting anything to anyone and just saying we're spending far too much time on it. What are we going to do about it? As a starting conversation, we've either just got to directly increase your rates and keep doing the same thing, or we need to look at doing projects to reduce it, or we've got to cut out things that are outside of agreement and then we'll bill by the hour.
Yep.
Just having that pragmatic conversation with the client. And from my experience and seeing so many people have done this in the past, it's not as awkward as we think. Most of the clients that we have, they all run businesses too. They know what it's like. So as long as you have an upfront, transparent conversation, the majority of people are going to get it and they're going to work with you to resolve it. The ones that are like 100% no, black and white, and they're trying to screw you. So they're not going to be a good client anyway. And if they're not profitable, what's the point of having it? You're basically paying people to have bums on seats to subsidize their business profitability.
Right.
So
So I need to replace that revenue. So we say, hey, client, we're going to kick you out, but now we're going to go on and take a new client. How do we choose whatever that per unit? And I don't want to get into the per user or per machine discussion, but how do you choose what that should be? Let's just say that you were in the 55. So you obviously have a long way to go. So that, I've heard people say 385 a seat, and that's, security stacks as high as the ceiling. And then I've heard people say, 100 is kind of where you should be. How do you kind of choose that? And obviously it varies by region and all these kind of things, and your own maturity, but how do you figure that out? How do you kind of go through that process?
you really got to take a step back and actually design this productized solution. This is where we all go wrong, is we don't actually start on a good foundation. We don't have a process to actually developing a product, because that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have built this from just putting the finger up in the air and guessing. What has someone else done? I'll just copy that, and that's become our industry.
Yep.
What we really like, the way to do this maturely is to break it out to what are we providing, what's the scope of that, how are we providing that service, how are we measuring it, who's involved, and what's the effort.
Yep.
And you can go as deep as you want in that. That can go super deep when you really do this properly. But just breaking that out in the first place starts to frame up, well, how do we price this? If it's going to take us, like, let's pick a random one, like patch management, it's going to take us 3 hours worth of labor a month. We've got a direct costs there, and we can then go back to, well, do we need to do it by labor? Do we use a tool to do that? And have those conversations. But we need to slow down and actually assess this, not just randomly grab what we've got, think that we should be $100 because that's what the rest of the market's doing,
Mm-hmm.
and just run with it, and just make reactive decisions based on it.
Yep.
Makes a big difference just to slow down and do an effort model rather than what we've typically done. I think the way to sum it up is we've treated it as a resold product, but what we're doing, we just go, oh, it's going to roughly cost us this, and then we're going to chuck X amount of gross margin on it, and we're going to resell it.
Right.
Where we're not really taking it as an effort model, which this is what it is.
Right. Yep. The what I used to tell people is, like, you're providing service, but you're not providing a managed service. So it's a big difference. You say you're an MSP and you're not managing anything. You're just out servicing customers all the time. Well, that's a great topic to, I think, talk about next time, in terms of building your product line and your offering, and from a service perspective, and how you can do that too, both from a, hey, what is packaged right for the customer, but more so, how do you build that as service managers and maintain and measure that? Thanks as always, James. I always enjoy these talks. This is great. So we'll hit you up on the next one, and I'll talk soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Look forward to it.
All right, bye.